Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. I am Jennifer Mitchell, and today we have a fabulous presentation by Bill Van Sickle, one of our Geographic Information System Analyst 3s here at the district, and he is out of the Office of Information Technology. Just a little bit of housekeeping about the presentation today. Everyone will be on mute throughout the presentation, but I do hope that you will type in any questions that you have throughout the presentation to be able to allow us to discuss those at the end of our presentation. If we do not get to all of the questions during our period for this presentation, we will get back to you in email about the answers to your questions, because we do want to make sure that everybody gets the greatest information from this presentation. I do hope that you will join us for our next webinar as well, and that will be Thursday, October 22nd, where we will be learning a little bit more about district lands and one of our really exciting endangered species that we have been able to help bring back from being endangered. Those are the red-cockaded woodpeckers. But again, thank you, Bill, for being here and for giving us this great overview of how the district uses aerial imagery and really is doing that in order to protect our water resources. Bill has been at the district for 27.5 years and has a wealth of information about how to utilize aerial images and address those water resources questions. So Bill, with that, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
Good, good. Hi, my name is Bill Van Sickle, as Jennifer said. I'm a professional geographer and a commercial remote pilot. That means that my job is analyzing data over space and time, and sometimes I get to fly a drone. A big part of this job requires what is called remote sensing, which is measuring and monitoring things from a distance. A big part of remote sensing, it includes imagery, whether that's collected from satellite or from aerial photos, from airplane or from a drone. But before I dive into all the techno nerd stuff, I want to give you the bigger picture of why and how we do what we do here at the district. What you see here are the district's fundamental mission elements. We measure, monitor, and manage water quality and quantity above and below ground. We provide flood protection, and we support and nurture natural systems like wetlands, which directly support our other goals by providing a place for all that water to go, give it an opportunity to slow down, drop some sediment, convert some of those nutrients into biomass, which in turn keeps the nutrients out of our lakes and streams, which prevents things like harmful algae blooms. Wetlands also fix CO2 from the atmosphere in the form of plants and trees. So on the left side of the screen, you should see mission areas, which tell us what we're legislatively mandated to manage. And on the right side, you can see our organizational values, which are set by our executive management and approved by our governing board. These values guide how we do what we do. Both of these sets of principles guide our activities as individuals and provide us with a sense of clarity and priority about how best to use our knowledge, skills, and abilities. So, as you can see from the map on the right, we cover a huge area. It's a quarter of the state, 20% of the state's population, almost 5 million people. And of that area, we own outright about 775,000 acres, which you see here in gray on this map. So I want to take us back to a moment here, give you a sense of perspective. My dad used to own a 100-acre farm in Indiana, and from his back porch, he could see his whole farm. He could wake up in the morning, walk out the back door, look to see if his cattle were where they belonged. Sometimes they weren't. He could see how his alfalfa was growing, or what his wheat or barley or oats were doing. And if he wanted more information, he could just get into the pickup truck and go take a closer look. He was actually practicing remote sensing when he was doing that. He was using his eyes as sensors And he would capture and interpret an image of the landscape based on light that came from the sun and was reflected to him in the form of color, tone, intensity, and texture. He could compare that image to other images stored in his memory to determine whether everything looked the way that it should, given time of year, given how much rain it had, and so on. At the district, we have a much larger area of responsibility than he had to deal with, but we have a similar responsibility for it, especially for the wetlands that we restore and manage. So we use different kinds of sensors and a different system for storage and analysis, but we're essentially doing the same thing. So, let's start with the big picture, satellite imagery. Satellite imagery is an excellent resource for environmental monitoring, and the European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 satellite, for instance, passes overhead about once a week, actually every 5 days. It's provided to us for free, and it provides 13 bands of imagery data. Each band of imagery data represents a discrete wavelength of light that tells us something about what's on the ground or in the air. So in addition to the visible light that you and I can detect with our eyes, over here it's bands B2, B3, and B4, it also captures infrared, near infrared, actually many different kinds of infrared, because that bounces off chlorophyll, which tells us things about plant health, and then shortwave infrared and kind of long shortwave infrared as well. We use the intensity values of these various bands of imagery to tell us what's going on, to detect the presence, absence, or abundance of plant chlorophyll, water, or a myriad of analytical parameters. And we can compare different bands of imagery to one another to create indexes, which can tell us what is vegetation, what's standing water, where are recent fires, etc. So here's just kind of a snapshot of Sentinel imagery taken. This is Lake Aquatic, which is kind of in the middle of our area of interest. And it demonstrates a few things. One is that spatial resolution of satellite imagery is pretty low. It's 10 to 20 meters. I don't know, I put 30 meters on there, whatever. But that's about 1/4 of an acre. And so everything in that 1/4 acre is resolved to a single blob of data in color. And so that's not going to tell us much about, it's not going to be able to pick out a car, for instance, or anything smaller than that. It will give us a sense of what's on the ground. And because it flies every 5 days, it's got high temporal resolution, or time resolution. Because there's 13 bands of data, it's high spectral resolution. But one of the biggest challenges, clouds and cloud shadows, especially in the summertime here in Florida. So let's zoom in a little further on that and look at this area. Now this big area here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this big area is the Lake Aquatic North Shore Restoration Area. It also includes the 11-mile wildlife drive, which goes through here. And I'm going to focus on this orange outlined area, which was an area that we were working with land management to control some of the non-native invasive species with herbicide, and then plant native species in their place, and then get a look at how well the native species survive. As you can see here, if you use satellite imagery for this, you're going to be kind of out of luck, because you got big puffy cumulus clouds and some smoke from a fire, it looks like, and some more smaller cumulus clouds, and then a really big one. This one's kind of working its way up to a cumulonimbus or a thunderhead, and then some high ice clouds. So we're not getting a lot of good imagery here that we can work with. But that being the case, here it is in August, so we know that we got maybe one decent picture in a month. That's still pretty good. Another downside that I spoke about earlier is that resolution. You can see what a big blurry mess this same picture is using satellite imagery versus aerial imagery. So let's talk about aerial imagery. This is aerial imagery. The scene on the right was captured by Lake County, and the scene on the left was captured by, sorry, the one on the right was Orange County, the one on the left is Lake County. And so you're below the cloud deck, which is good, or you're working in cloud-free conditions, which is also good. It's higher resolution. It's 4 bands, which is pretty good. So that's like red, green, blue, and infrared. And but the downside is they're only going to fly that about once every 3 years. So that's not going to be quick enough to give us information about what's going on in the project here. And so if you focus on this little red box right here and zoom into that, that's what it's going to look like, which is still pretty good and still way better than satellite, but it's still difficult to kind of discern one thing from another with that. And again, you're at the mercy of whenever they took that imagery. Now here, this is drone imagery. It was taken as a series of about 5,000 images and mosaicked into these imagery mosaics. And you can see we got much more up to date and much higher resolution. And I think I'm going to zoom back in on that little red box. And here you can see right after they treated the area with herbicide, they've managed to knock back all the invasives that were crowding the area out. This was in July of 2018. We covered this entire area here with this project. But I'm just trying to give you a small piece of that. So we took this imagery to create polygons, give those polygons or outlines to our vendor contractor, who then went and planted this whole area, he didn't plant the whole area, but they planted areas that were open in wetland species that are native. And then, so this is July 2018. I came back in October of 2018 after they finished the work to see and show and document what they had planted. And you can see here these little light colored things are actually plants that they planted in the wetland. And another thing you may notice here is that these plants, these floating plants around it, are already starting to crowd in that space. So we've gone from, in 3 months, we've gone from open water to getting crowded, right? So the question is, how well is that going to do over the next 6 months to a year? Because we actually had a performance bonus that we were prepared to give them if a certain percentage of the plants survive. And so we flew it again in April of the following year, and you can see that they filled in really well here and down here. Both of those were planted species, and we were able to show that the vendor did their job properly, and we were able to give them a bonus. So to kind of sum up, the drone imagery, which we only take over district lands, or unless we're asked to by a landowner, and we can get permission from our management to do it. It's very high spatial resolution, 1 to 3 centimeters. Its temporal resolution can be very high. It's as often as you need to fly it. It's only 3 bands, just the visible light. We actually have a multispectral sensor, but that only catches 4 bands, maybe 5. And I can only fly 120 acres at a single sortie. So it's kind of time and cost intensive. I think this whole project area, 1,500 acres, took me about a week to fly. So plus there's travel time. So that, it's all a trade-off. And I wanted to tell you also about our ability to go back in time, which I think is a really amazing kind of superpower. I was able to find this image this image from 1947 in the University of Florida Map Library collection. And in about half an hour, I was able to download it to the computer, georeference it, put it up on the screen, and then you can kind of see what the area looked like 70 years ago. So here's another example of what we can use drones for, and that's documenting construction. This was an early project that Kendall Fioravante and I flew, and what you're seeing is the drone imagery on top of the Google style imagery here, and you can interact with it, kind of zoom in, get better detail, and even look at it as a 3D model. So in the event where our management is trying to show governing board members what they're doing to restore this drainage structure, we can show that we put in sheet pile, that we have these pumps here that are draining the water out. We put a new riprap here. It's these heavy rocks that kind of stabilize the bank. Put in some sod, repainted, repaired the concrete, repainted the steel, etc. So this becomes a powerful tool for letting our stakeholders know what we're doing. This is a project that we did during COVID lockdown, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's cool that we were able to do it during the COVID lockdown. Pete Henn is our land manager, and this is at the Lake Monroe Conservation Area, which is a pretty large area, but it's got some areas of Florida scrub jay habitat that he was trying to maintain. So he identified an area here where we had scrub jay habitat. He captured these drone images from about 400 feet of elevation above the ground surface, and then he uploaded those to the server in Palatka from his home in Titusville. And he called me, my home in Gainesville, and I accessed them via our internet connection. And I was able to resolve these photos into a single mosaic that looks kind of like this. It's a nice picture, but it's still not really telling Pete what he needs to know in order to manage scrub jay habitat. What Pete really needs to know about scrub jay habitat is he needs to know the height of the vegetation, because the scrub jay utilize ground level to 3 feet off the ground for foraging. They use 3 feet to 6 feet for nesting, and then anything above that is not really of value to this endangered species, and it is of value to predators who will then swoop down on the blue jay nests and take their young. So this is an elevation model that we created using photogrammetry principles and some software called Pix4D to model the tops of vegetation. It still doesn't get us where we need to be, because that just gives us elevation. It gives us like the height above sea level. We need to in order to get the height of veg, we need to be able to subtract the top of the vegetation from the bottom of the vegetation, which is the ground. So there we were able to use Lidar data. And here's the Lidar subset you're looking at. And Lidar is technology we use here also, where we'll overfly an area with, we'll actually have a contractor will overfly an area with a sensor that pings the ground with infrared laser beam pulses. And based on how long it takes that pulse to get to the ground and back again, they're able to determine what the elevation is. And they coordinate that with survey, and they can actually give us a very accurate ground elevation model. So that, and then algorithmically, using software and very talented people, they pull all the vegetation off visually, and they're able to give us a bare earth surface. So here's the ground elevation. Here's the top of veg on top of it. Subtract the two, and you get a height map. And here you have the light green areas are for foraging, the brighter green areas are for nesting, and the red areas are potentially predator habitat. So Pete was able to use this information to go and chainsaw down some of the taller stuff that would normally be managed by fire, but we have houses in the area, so we can't just let the wildfires come through, and able to minimize predator habitat and maximize useful scrubjet habitat. And this is another project that Pete and I did together, also during COVID, where he went out and captured a whole bunch of images over a burn scar, so over a controlled burn that he had just completed. And then we were able to digitize this and give a number of acres of burn, and then we can calculate cost per acre and give that information to our management. It also informs us about areas of burn when they have been burned, how recently, how frequently, and how well the vegetative communities are responding. And then there's a lot of other things I do, but just trying to give you a sense of all of it. This is a project that it was a kind of a demo project we did because I would like to in the future get imagery, video imagery of the land that we own and manage, and maintain trails, parking areas, restrooms, and so on for you to use. And I would like you as our customer to be able to go and visit that and see what it looks like without having to leave your house. So, so we just did a demonstration on the Rice Creek Conservation Area, and my dream and my goal is to be able to provide this to you so that you can do that visualization if you want, or if you're unable to leave a wheelchair or a bed, that you might even be able to interact with it directly, well, not directly, but as if it was interacting directly, where you go through the recreation area and see what it's like, maybe go down the trails or whatever. So, oops, I think I've gotten myself out of my presentation mode. So that's the end of my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Bill. That was really informative and really does do a nice job of overviewing all of the ways that you're able to use aerial imagery in the variety of work that we do here at the district. One of the questions that did come in, again, if others have questions that you want to get answers from, please enter those in your question box, and that is in that control panel on the right side of your screen. One of the questions was, can the aerial or Lidar data be used for submerged aquatic vegetation?
Well, that's a great question. The answer is yes and no. In the case of clear water, like we have most of the time in the Indian River Lagoon system, you can use some bands of LiDAR, so particular wavelengths of light that can penetrate the water and bounce off of the veg. Of course, you still need a map of the surface underneath the veg in order to calculate biovolume. But yes, that can be done. It can also be done with sonar. In the dark water systems that we have in most of our district, there has not been yet discovered a wavelength of light that penetrates through that well enough to give you a good image of the vegetation.
So there are a couple of additional, more technical questions that came in. One was, what software packages do you use?
So the GIS software we use is ArcGIS, but there are some shareware versions like QGIS and whatnot that folks can use. We have used Drone Deploy, but that's a subscription software, so it's an ongoing cost, and we try to avoid ongoing costs. That's great software for just getting started. It can process your imagery on the cloud. I found it really handy for being able to go out and fly a mission, stop at the public library on the way back to the district, upload it all to the cloud, and by the time I got back to work, I'd have a mosaic map waiting on my in my inbox, which was really cool. Pix4D is what we use exclusively now, because we could actually purchase a version of that and not have to pay ongoing costs. And that's a lot more difficult to work with, but it gives you a lot more flexibility and allows you to bring in survey data and work under the supervision of the surveyor to get vertical and horizontal control nailed down, so that you can say, this is the height and the width of a levee within a half a foot, so that then we can go if anywhere it's skinny or low, we could send somebody out there to survey it and get more accurate points. But it's a really good way to be able to survey or to review a large area.
Awesome. This is a safety question of why is there a fire extinguisher in your picture here with the drone?
Excellent. Another excellent question. So there's a lot of PPE, personal protection equipment going on here, right? I got the helmet, I got the sunshade, got the sunglasses, got the boots, all that stuff. The fire extinguisher, so that's kind of going to protect me from the local, most of the local threats. The gators are scary, but they don't, they're usually pretty shy. The fire extinguisher is in case one of the lithium-ion batteries in that drone runs away. Basically, they'll start generating heat just as the way they function. And if they generate too much heat, then they melt some insulator and short out, in which case they'll generate more heat and short out more insulators. And so they can catch fire. I've never had it happen to me, but that equipment is going to be there just in case. And when people offer me the fire extinguisher off of their truck, I'll say, this is for the drone, you keep yours for the truck. Again, we haven't had any problem with it, but we want to be prepared for it.
So we have several questions about what type of drones do we have at the district. So what kind do you use and what kind are at your disposal, and what's the benefit of each?
So the one you're looking at here is called an Inspire 1. It's made by a company called DJI out of China. They're about a tenth as much as the American ones that we had to choose from at the time, so we're trying to keep the cost down. That one is really nice because you can see that little camera down there on that gimbal at the bottom, that's under its belly. You can actually switch that out to different kinds of sensors, thermal sensors, multiple band sensors, etc. And it's kind of a heavy unit, so I find that even in pretty strong crosswinds and gusts, it stays very stable. The other one we use is a Phantom 4, which is probably the most widely used DJI or widely used drone in the prosumer market, the kind of pro level, consumer level, either high consumer or low pro level, and also very inexpensive and a really handy and easy to use unit.
I have one more that's technical and has lots of acronyms, so I will do the best that I can. Sorry, we got in some more questions. How many GCPs do you usually use? And is RTK or PPK part of your projects?
I can answer, I can unpack those for you if you like. So what that questioner is alluding to is about how do we establish vertical control and ground control. In other words, how do I know that what's on the ground is where it is? And for many projects, for most imagery projects, the GPS system on the drone is sufficient to give you close enough, within a meter or two kind of accuracy. But if you were doing a levee, for instance, you would definitely want to use survey. And the answer to the question about how many, so you'd have to use ground control points, which are points that you can see from the drone. We actually put little targets out on the ground. They're black and white floor tiles that we get from Home Depot, but they're about a foot square, and they do a really good job of kind of showing us where the center is, where the point is, and we'll nail that down to the levee using a spike. and then we'll have it surveyed, and then I'll use that to tell the computer, the Pix4D software, that this point represents this location in three-dimensional space on the face of the Earth. And so how many GCPs, how many ground control points you use, it just depends on the project. How you distribute them is even more important. In levee, in the case of the levee, you want it on both sides of the levee and on the center of the levee, and probably going to do 3 or 4 of them per quarter mile. And then if you don't want to do all that survey work, there's also real-time kinetic positioning, which is RTK, and that's a situation where you put a little ground control station on the ground, and it knows, it actually connects to a terrestrial network that tells it exactly where it is within a centimeter in X, Y, and Z, and then it constantly communicates with the drone and gives it a correction, a signal correction of its location, so the drone knows where it is within a centimeter at all times. And that costs about 10 times as much as just buying the drone, but sometimes it's worth it. And then another alternative is PPK, which is post-processing, where you can, that one's a little more complicated, but basically you just do the math after the fact rather than in real time.
Great, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here today, Bill. There were a couple of questions that were coming in still, so I'll make sure I get those over to you and get answers to those folks. But I really appreciate everyone's time and want to make sure that we respect the time of the webinar. And so thank you for coming today. If you have questions, please feel free to enter them into that question box, or you're welcome to email myself. That information is in the invitation you used to sign on. I appreciate it, and thank you, Bill, so much for your presentation today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Have a good day.